Well, L. Chris Stewart is the lawyer representing Rayshard Brooks' family and joins us now. L. Chris Stewart, thank you for being with us. What justification have police got or have given for shooting Rayshard Brooks?
They haven't yet. The first thing that was put out was that he turned around and pointed the taser at the officer, and it appeared to the public that maybe he was charging towards him or something like that. But when we saw the surveillance footage, he was running away, pointing it backwards. And in the U.S., in Georgia, a taser is not a lethal weapon. It's rated just like pepper spray and a baton. So it's not a lethal weapon. So he had no justification to use deadly force.
Watching the whole video and all the various bits of it which have now emerged, Mr. Stewart, it seems to be an extraordinary situation where he's asleep in his car, the police are alerted to it, they're not even sure, I think they've now conceded, as to whether they should have got involved with or not, but they make a decision to do that, which turns out to be a deadly one. But there's then quite a long, reasonably civilised conversation between Rayshard Brooks and the police. It never gets confrontational, it's quite sort of civilised. You know, they're having a two-way conversation about whether he should have the breathalyzer and so on. And it suddenly all explodes when he's put in handcuffs. Have you been able to try and work out a probability of what it was that triggered Rayshard Brooks to react that way?
Yeah, you're right on point. I mean, the conversation it lasted for almost 40 minutes. He answered all the questions. He was doing the tests. He called them sir. He did everything that African-American parents tell their kids to do if they're stopped by the police, in being polite and answering questions, not being threatening. And then he was questioned and tested for so long that Officer Ruff finally decided to put him in handcuffs, and then he reacted. What we have found out is that, talking to his wife, they've been watching the George Floyd death, which has been repeated time and time again, where he died in handcuffs after not even resisting. So we don't know what was in his mind. Maybe he realized that getting put in handcuffs doesn't mean they're going to safely put me in the car, and he freaked out. But that's not a death sentence. Running from a police officer, you should not do that ever, but it's not a death sentence.
Is there a possibility, if you're putting yourself into the minds of those police officers, because we've seen the footage and we don't know what the real lighting was like and so on and so on, is there a possibility that that police officer who fired the lethal shots, that he may have mistaken the taser for a real gun?
Absolutely not. You know, that's the one thing that we do is we stick to the facts. If you watch the full surveillance video, and there's hours of it from dash cam to the body cam to the surveillance, they did a full pat down of him. They checked him, made sure he didn't have any weapons. They got his ID. They had his car. He couldn't go anywhere. And if he did run off, they know where he is. They knew he didn't have a weapon. And if you listen to the video, the officer says, he has my taser. He has my taser. So they knew what he had. The officer chasing behind him changes from his taser to his gun before he even appears to say that he's being threatened by Mr. Brooks pointing the taser backwards. He already was going for his gun.
Mr. Stewart, you mentioned something in an answer you just gave about the talk that African-American parents give young people about what to do when you are stopped by the police. Do you mean that there is a specific way of acting that African-American parents say to the young people that they have to carry out in order to de-escalate any confrontation because they are at more risk than, for instance, their white friends?
Yeah, it's called the talk. And a lot of African-American parents do it. I got it when I was growing up. You know, you put your hands on the steering wheel as soon as you're pulled over. You don't raise your voice. You answer any questions immediately. You try and be polite just because you don't want to give any reason for the officer to escalate the situation. And that's just because the relationship has been fractured between policing and community. And it's, you know, it's no slight because there are phenomenal police officers here, but there are a lot of officers also that don't have any type of understanding and escalate situations when involved with an African American.
What you said was very interesting about what may have been the mindset of Rayshard Brooks, that in that moment that he's cuffed,
he panicked.
Because of his, he may have been under the influence of alcohol, he admitted he'd taken alcohol and so on, that in that moment he panicked because of what he saw with George Floyd. And that is now going to be, isn't it, an added dimension to the distrust between the police and black people in America in particular in that kind of situation.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you think that before George Floyd, if you're put in handcuffs, that you're just going to, get arrested or be put in the back of the car. But that didn't happen with George Floyd. And that video is played over and over again. And his wife said they watched it and talked about it and debated about it and, were upset by it. So, he freaked out. And, you never should, of course, touch an officer or fight with an officer, but it's not a death sentence. Just catch him later. And it's those situations where we need a different response to situations where a man is sleeping in a drive-through or even under the influence. Our officers shouldn't have to respond to those situations like that.
You also have an issue, don't you? I mean, you talk about the fact that there are excellent police officers, but that there are also police officers who cannot be relied upon in these situations. But you also, so you have a breakdown of trust between communities and the police from that point of view. You have the video of George Floyd, which has, seen that sort of fissure turn into a chasm. There's also an issue, isn't there, with people calling the police? I mean, the boys who called the police on George Floyd never, ever intended or could have imagined that it would lead to what we all saw. The employee who called the police on Rayshard, who wasn't concerned that a crime was being committed, but was concerned that there was a man asleep in his car and, just wanted it checked out. I mean, can you see a point where there might be a reluctance for people to just call the police because they're too worried about the consequences?
Yeah, it's a real thing. Right now, there's a big debate going on of, defunding the police or not using the police, because sadly, in a lot of situations, when the police are called and it's an African-American involved, it ends up in a situation like this from something extremely minor because that particular officer's mindset is too aggressive and too militarized when the core duty is to protect and serve. That's all I'm trying to get this country back to.
How big a problem, Mr. Stewart, is America's gun culture to all this? I spent a lot of time working in America and covering a lot of very unfortunate mass shootings, but also incidents like this where, I always think of a parallel to here in this country, England. If that kind of scenario happened in England, no one was going to get shot because very likely the police wouldn't be armed. Definitely no expectation on the police's part that the person they're apprehending would be armed. Very few people have guns here. And it seemed to me in America that a lot of these little microaggressions that go on a daily basis that we have here escalate incredibly quickly into a deadly situation because of a paranoia on both sides about guns.
With this particular situation and overall, I can't necessarily just put that on the right to bear arms, which we have here. And, I also do believe in is George Floyd didn't die from a gunshot. Gregory Towns, another case I had, he didn't die from a gunshot.
I was talking specifically about Rayshard Brooks, is that there's sort of a lot of tasers, as it turned out, but also the police end up using deadly force to stop him. That simply wouldn't happen here, most likely.
And that's why, I've been pushing the idea of a separate department for the police who responds to this, who aren't armed necessarily with a firearm,
yes,
but they respond to a drunk person sitting in a parking lot asleep, and just talk to them and see how they can resolve the situation without the use of deadly force.